In the heart of a forgotten village, shrouded in the dense fog of an eternal twilight, stood the dilapidated remains of what was once a grand manor. Its history was lost to time, and the locals spoke of it only in hushed tones, as if fearing that merely mentioning it would awaken something sinister. I, driven by an insatiable curiosity and a penchant for the macabre, decided to document the forgotten tales of this forsaken place. As I approached the manor, the air grew colder, and the silence was so profound it felt almost tangible, pressing against my ears with an eerie insistence. The once majestic structure now loomed before me, its windows like dark, unblinking eyes, and the door ajar, as if inviting me into its maw. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing through the vast, empty halls, disturbing the dust that had lain undisturbed for decades. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and a sense of unease began to coil in my stomach, but my curiosity propelled me forward. I wandered through the rooms, each more decrepit than the last, their once lavish furnishings now moth-eaten and covered in a thick layer of dust. It was in the library, however, that I felt a distinct shift in the atmosphere. The air grew colder, and I could swear I felt the faintest brush of something against my cheek, like the caress of a cobweb or the whisper of a long-forgotten secret. As I delved deeper into the bowels of the manor, the oppressive silence was suddenly shattered by a soft, mournful wail that seemed to emanate from the very walls. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to flee, but I was rooted to the spot, transfixed by the sound that seemed to echo the despair of 1,000 lost souls. I stumbled upon a staircase spiraling down into darkness, and against my better judgment, I descended. The air grew heavier with each step, and the darkness seemed to swallow the weak beam of my flashlight, rendering it almost useless. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a vast underground chamber, its purpose long forgotten. In the center stood an ancient altar, its stone surface stained with dark, dried liquid that I dared not identify. The wailing had grown louder now, a cacophony of sorrow that filled the chamber and seemed to vibrate through my very bones. It was then that I saw them, shadows darker than the surrounding darkness, shifting and writhing along the walls. They seemed to be reaching for me, their forms twisting and contorting in impossible ways. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed, my voice trapped in my throat. The shadows began to coalesce, forming a figure that was both human and not, its features blurred and constantly shifting. It spoke, its voice a chilling whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Why have you come here?" it asked, its tone laced with an ancient sorrow. I tried to respond, to explain my foolish desire to uncover the secrets of this place, but no words came. The figure seemed to consider me for a moment before it spoke again. "You seek the stories of the dead, but are you prepared to join them?" Panic surged through me, lending strength to my limbs, and I turned to flee, but the chamber seemed to stretch on endlessly. The door I had entered through now nowhere in sight. The wailing grew louder, a deafening roar that filled my head, drowning out all thought. Just when I thought I could bear no more, the figure appeared before me once more, its form more defined now, the features of a woman emerging from the shadows. Her eyes were pools of darkness, but within them I saw a glimmer of something else. Regret, perhaps, or a plea for release. "I am bound to this place," as she whispered, her voice barely audible over the din. "Bound by the sins of my past, by the blood spilled upon this altar. Free me, and I shall grant you safe passage." Desperation clawed at me, and without fully understanding what I was doing, I found myself nodding, agreeing to her terms. She guided me to the altar, instructing me to complete a ritual that felt as ancient as the stones themselves. As I uttered the final words, the chamber began to shake, the air filled with a blinding light. The wailing reached a crescendo before abruptly ceasing, leaving behind a silence so profound it was almost deafening. When my vision cleared, I found myself standing outside the manor, the sun rising on the horizon, casting its first light on the village in what felt like an eternity. The manor itself seemed different, less foreboding, as if a great weight had been lifted from it. I never returned to that forsaken place, nor did I speak of what transpired that night, but sometimes in the dead of night, I swear I can hear a soft, mournful wail carried on the wind. A reminder of the price of curiosity and the thin veil that separates the living from the dead.
In the realm of dreams, I found myself wandering through a labyrinth of vivid memories and whimsical fantasies, a place where the impossible seemed mundane, and the mundane extraordinary. The air was filled with the laughter of old friends and the melody of a forgotten song, weaving a tapestry of comfort and joy around me. It was a sanctuary, a respite from the trials of the waking world, and I reveled in its beauty. But then, without warning, the scene shifted. The laughter faded, the music died, and I was plunged into darkness, a heavy, suffocating darkness that pressed in on me from all sides, stealing my breath and smothering my cries. Panic surged through me as I struggled against the unseen force, my mind racing to make sense of what was happening. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was confined, trapped in a space so small I could barely move. My hands flew to my sides, encountering smooth, unyielding surfaces just inches from my body. Above me, the same. I was in a box, a coffin. My heart thundered in my chest, a frantic drumbeat in the oppressive silence. I opened my mouth to scream, to call for help, but the sound that tore from my throat was muffled, stifled by the thick walls of my wooden prison. And then the hammering began. It started as a distant tapping, a sound almost comforting in its regularity. But as my mind grasped the implications of that sound, comfort turned to terror. Someone was nailing the coffin shut, sealing me within this dark tomb while I was still alive. I screamed again, a raw, desperate sound that tore at my throat. I pounded on the lid of the coffin, my fists bruising against the hard wood. But the sound of my terror was drowned out by the relentless hammering of the nails. With each strike of the hammer, a nail was driven deeper into the wood, and with each nail my hope of escape dwindled. The sound was deafening, each blow echoing in the confined space, a grim reminder of my impending fate. I couldn't understand how this had happened, how I had gone from the bliss of my dream to the nightmare of being buried alive. My mind raced, seeking an explanation, a way out, but there was none to be found. The only reality was the coffin, the darkness, and the hammering that continued without mercy. As the last nail was driven home, the hammering ceased, leaving behind a silence more terrifying than the noise. I was alone, utterly and hopelessly alone, in a darkness that seemed to press against my eyes, a weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I don't know how long I lay there, trapped in the darkness, my mind teetering on the brink of madness. Time lost all meaning in that small, dark space. There was only the fear, the suffocating fear, that filled every corner of my mind, leaving no room for anything else. But then, just when I thought I could bear no more, a sliver of light pierced the darkness. It was faint, barely more than a pinprick in the distance, but to my starved senses, it was as bright as the sun. With a strength bore of desperation, I reached for that light, clawing at the lid of the coffin with bleeding fingers. The wood gave way beneath my assault, splintering and cracking, and the light grew brighter, warmer. I could feel the fresh air brushing against my skin, taste the sweetness of it on my tongue. With one final Herculean effort, I pushed against the lid, and it flew open, releasing me from my prison. I gasped, drawing in great lungfuls of air as I emerged from the coffin, blinking against the sudden brightness. I was in a room, a small, nondescript room with a single window through which the light streamed. There was no sign of the coffin, no sign of the hammering that had sealed me within it. It had all been a dream, a nightmare from which I had finally awoken. But even as relief washed over me, I couldn't shake the feeling of terror that the dream had instilled. The sound of a hammer striking a nail would forever hold a new, sinister meaning for me, a reminder of the time I spent trapped in the darkness, screaming for a salvation that seemed would never come.